Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is right around the top of the hour. We're going to give it about 60 seconds to allow everyone to get logged on, and we'll be underway. It's great to have you joining us here today. And with that, why don't we get underway? It is great to have you again with us today. My name is Dan Worry. I am the Director of Early Learning at the Hunt Institute. I want to welcome you to our first installment of our Early Efforts web series for 2021. We've got a great panel assembled today to talk about brain science and its implications for policymakers. Before we get started with the panel, I want to introduce you, as always, to my friend and colleague, Dr. Jubaid Siddiqui, who is President and CEO of the Hunt Institute. Jubaid.
Thanks, Dan, and good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for making time to be with us. As Dan mentioned, I do have the great honor of serving as the president of the Hunt Institute. For the benefit of anyone who may not know about the Institute or is new to our programming today, the Institute was a creation of our founder and our namesake, four-term North Carolina Governor, Jim Hunt. We serve as an education policy support to governors, state lawmakers, and other high-level elected leaders and appointed leaders across the country. We cover the full spectrum of the education policy from prenatal to post-secondary. I've really been looking forward to today's Early Efforts webinar, which is focused in part on the National Academy of Sciences' new The Science Behind It report on the value of early childhood education. It is especially notable that the Academy has pulled this summary together as a series features only topics where the scientists involved feel that the research is sufficient to consider the topic settled. This is the first and only Science Behind It brief on an education topic. If you've not had the opportunity to review the report, you can find it. I think we've placed it in the chat feature right now. It comes from the National Academy of Science. The report is designed and written for public consumption. It may well be a resource for you, and I would encourage you to share it with your own stakeholder audiences freely. To kick off our Early Efforts series for 2021, we've invited our partners and friends from the University of Washington, the Bezos Family Foundation, and 0 to 3 to help us put the science into perspective in terms of how it informs policy for young children and their families. Moderating and leading our conversation is Dr. Dan Worry. He's our Director of Early Childhood Learning. He's a really fantastic leader and gentleman in this space, and we're thankful for all the work he's done these past 2 years at the Hunt Institute to really build our brand in the 0 to 5 space. So Dan, I'll turn it back to you to get our conversation going.
Great, Jubaid, thank you. And again, welcome everyone. Happy New Year. We're so glad to have you back with us. And you know, it's interesting, this series, we often talk about sort of the how of early childhood, but I think today, appropriate that we start off a new year with a little discussion of the why of early childhood. And as Jubaid mentioned, the National Academy of Sciences has just put out here about 2 months ago, a report in the Science Behind It series that relates to whether or not, sort of the question of whether or not high quality early childhood programs have a long-term impact on the participants. I probably no great surprise to those of you who are registered today. The answer obviously is yes, but we're going to delve into that answer a little bit more deeply with our panel today. Dr. Patricia Kuhl is the co-director of the University of Washington's Institute for Learning and Brain Science. She also serves on the board of directors of the National Academy of Science. Ellen Galinsky is the Chief Science Officer for the Bezos Family Foundation. She is the founder of the Mind in the Making program, and also, as I'm sure many of you know, the author of the very renowned book by the same title. And Myra Jones-Taylor is the Chief Policy Officer for 0 to 3. And all panelists, we are so glad to have all of you here with us today. Dr. Kuhl, I wanted to start with you, and maybe structure this conversation a little bit differently than we typically do, and give you a little bit of extra time here up front because of your connection to this report and to the National Academy. You are on the board of directors and on the National Academy Council that oversees the process. So you are not directly an author of this report, but help to kind of oversee and approve the release of the report, but are obviously super well known and respected in the early childhood world, and so super appropriate that we have a conversation with you about this report as well. Thought maybe you could start by giving a little bit of context from maybe not so much on the content, but on the process here from the National Academy's perspective. Maybe tell us a little bit about what is the Science Behind It series, and why is it significant that early childhood has become the first education topic to be addressed in the series?
Well, thank you, Dan, and I'm so happy to be here and appreciate joining this conversation because it's so important. So there's an interesting story behind the science behind it. It is, as has been mentioned, a communications branch of the National Academy of Sciences. And the National Academy was formulated in 1863 by President Abraham Lincoln when he signed into law a bill that was presented by Congress, approved by Congress, that we needed a scientific group that would advise the country on issues related to the national interest. And so the council formed many research study groups that would pore over hundreds and hundreds of reports in various branches of science and produce 350-page reports that answers a specific question. And of course, the science behind it understood that nobody's going to read 350 pages. And so what they do is distill the messages of those reports in these key areas. So that's how we come to these questions answered by the science behind it. But what's significant here is that the questions usually addressed are things about climate change, about the oceans, about space, about biotech, about pandemics and medical issues that we all care about vaccines. And all of a sudden we see one on early learning. And the question addressed is quite formal and specific. It says, does quality early education lead to more successful lives as adults? So it's highly significant that, one, the Academy felt as though the data are sufficient to answer that question. And two, there's enough public demand in this arena to spend the time and the effort to answer this question in a very readable, for those of you who go to the report, and I urge you to do it, it's a very simply described, very thorough with regard to the topics it raises. You'll all be able to understand it. It's a very important report for all of us.
Definitely agree, and I think even for those of us in the field, you may be familiar with National Academy reports, as Dr. Kuhl mentioned, that are hundreds of pages long and coming from a very scholarly perspective. And so if you have not had a chance to look, I do encourage you. We did drop the link in the chat, but it is not your typical National Academy's report. It is really succinct. It's written, very plainly and clearly in a way that I'd be very surprised that, if many of you who are watching today wouldn't potentially want to use it with stakeholder audiences, including parents that you are working with. So definitely want to encourage you to check it out. And really is, exciting to see early childhood held up, among those topics, the climate changes and so on. So why don't we shift a little bit, Dr. Kuhl, to the findings of the report itself? You want to talk to us a little bit about, what, as the Academy was sort of distilling, all of that important research, what does the report have to tell us?
Well, I think it makes some very, very important points. So first of all, it's very comforting to see that they answer the question in the strong affirmative. Does it matter? Yes, it absolutely matters. And not just for short-term gains that children make when they are in early education programs, but in the long term, for jobs, for income, for general health. And so these long-term effects have been measured in quite a few studies and show that we can be secure in thinking that investments in early development have payoffs way later. And they address the question of why. Why do these early investments make such a difference? And they're saying that children become more confident. They're better at social interactions. They're better at directing their attention. They're more effective learners. And they go on to explain why is that the case? Why should this early experience produce that kind of a more efficient learner? They mention the fact that early in development, there's a sensitive period for brain development. And we know that's a time in which positive experience build neural architecture that leads children to gain in many, many ways and grow their skills once they've set on the right pathway. And they also say, look, it's not all a positive story because adversity during that critical period also has an effect. If the brain is in a sensitive period where experience is directly affecting the architecture of the brain, then good experience grow that brain in positive ways. Poor experiences, bad experience, adversity leads you in the opposite direction. So they're not naive. The studies show that this goes in both directions. They also talk about the fact that, why should the nation care about this? They point to the fact that these experiences early in life are not just building children who learn in school, but people who are more successful in their lives. Since the nation depends on our children to fill our jobs, to make our companies efficient and make our workplaces leading edge places of innovation, we need children to be innovative, creative, and prepared for those futures. So whether you have children or not, they say, I think this is so potent. We're all invested in these young learners. Another topic, a very important topic, is the fact that the playing field is not even. They're saying, okay, we've made the argument that this early learning experience is so valuable for our children. Well, are the children getting it? Is there an equal playing field? And the answer is absolutely not. The access to these early learning, high quality educational experiences is severely limited. The cost of it is borne by parents. Parents cannot afford high quality education. Many of them can't. And even those that are subsidized are not sufficiently subsidized. And so they point out the fact that this unequal playing field disallows this experience that we know is valuable for a certain percentage of the children, and that's got to be addressed. And they also explain in the funding aspects, look, the funding that we need is going to probably take a private partnership with public partnership, a weigh-in of corporations and businesses and of the public. We need to convince the public that the investment in early childhood education is valuable for all of us, and that will come as something that we all pay attention to as we vote for people in office who we believe to care about early education. So finally, I think they end with a kind of positive note. This can be done. This is not an impossible to achieve goal. This can be done not only for some children, but all children. It is something we should invest in. We should prepare ourselves to believe that not only the children are valued, and we need to invest in the children, we need to invest in the teachers who teach the children. So the early childhood education is a profession, and professional training in child development, in brain development, in the most modern techniques of educational learning. And these days, even some notions about online learning, some knowledge of the science out there about online learning, that we have to invest in the professionals, the teachers who are on the front lines with our children. So I think the report summarizing that it can be achieved is a very positive one for us, one that we should use, and one that we should stand behind and feel fantastic that the National Academy of Sciences has armed us in this way with such good evidence in support of this issue.
That's cool. Thank you so much. And I want to mention to those of you who are watching, if you have questions for the panel, we are going to try to take some time toward the end of the hour to answer questions from the audience, and you can plug those directly into the Q&A function there on Zoom at the bottom of your screen. While we're talking about that, I did want to mention one other thing you probably have noticed from seeing it listed on the screen here, but we are offering today's program and many of our webinars going forward with closed captioning. So if you would like to avail yourself of that service, if you hover your mouse near the bottom of the screen, you'll see a series of 3 dots that says more. And if you click there, you can get to the subtitle settings within Zoom. And so we hope that that is a help to you here as we go on. I'm going to turn to Ellen Galinsky next. Ellen, you and I have talked a number of times about our excitement about the National Academy's report. I'm curious to know from your perspective, what is the significance of the report in your mind, and how do its findings reinforce the work that you are doing now at the Bezos Family Foundation in the Mind in the Making program?
Thank you so much, Dan, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. Mind in the Making is a now 21-year effort to continue to review the science, both of children's development, but also of efforts to improve children's development, and to curate and share and then bring to action the best research. And I was so pleased to see this report mentioning some of the studies. We always talk about the neural architecture, as Pat was talking about, but some of the studies in this very brief and readable report are things like children very early on, babies, can understand and reason about the intentions of others and can have an intuitive sense of addition and subtraction, and can understand cause and effect in increasingly sophisticated ways. So I think when I read that research, I always put it under the topic of amazing babies, but it is wonderful that they shared it. What I want to talk about, I sort of fondly thought to myself as shining a light into the black box, because for so many years, we haven't really known what it was about quality. What were the ingredients of quality that really made a difference? And the Academy does a great job of pulling many of those out. And I'd like to go a little bit further with that from the studies that we've been doing, but start with the fact that so often early childhood is justified, the investment is, by looking at the Perry Preschool Project, the Abecedarian Project, the Chicago Child Parent Centers. And in 2006, I had an opportunity. I was invited by the Committee for Economic Development. They, as Pat mentioned, care about the workforce of the future. So they wanted to look at a cost-benefit analysis. And I said, I don't really want to write about another cost-benefit analysis. That has been written about a million times. What I would really like to do is to go back and interview the people who ran those programs, because most of them are still around. And I'd like to know what they think they were doing that made a difference. It was particularly important to me because I had actually visited all but the Chicago program in their very early days. I was at Bank Street, and we always made pilgrimages to exciting interventions to see what was happening. Now, most of the efforts to explain those programs looked at what we think of as structural quality, which are staff-child ratios and group size and teacher qualifications, and increasingly importantly, teacher compensation and the quality of the environment. But I knew from a study that I had done in the 1990s, where we did a series of studies evaluating interventions. This was an evaluation of a beautiful corporate center. It was perfectly gorgeously designed. It had everything of the structural quality ingredients in it. But when we looked at child outcomes, we didn't find quality. And that's because it was missing something that the Academy says is so important, which is process quality. That is relationships. It's relationship stupid is the way I always think about that. That what happens to children depend on the relationships with the people that they're with. And so in looking at what, mostly when we talk about relationships, we talk about them being warm and responsive. But we at the Mind in the Making team, with some of our partners at the University of Minnesota, Bill Zalazzo, Brandon Almy, and other people, are beginning to look at a framework to try to understand what's in that black box, or to understand development. And first, I think you have to start with intentionality. We found in a study that we did of family childcare that the people who wanted to be providing family childcare and continued to learn about it were the people who did the best job. And that was absolutely true of Abbas and Darien. When we visited, every day they talked about each child and made plans. They were developing a curriculum, and they made plans for how to help that child development. Then having a developmental framework, understanding what normal development is like. For example, I remember Craig Ramey with a child would say red ball, and Craig would talk about the kind of things that Pat has done such wonderful research on, which is next time you elaborate the sentence, this is a red ball. Do you want to play with it? Adding rich and diverse language to that. But understanding particularly that children learn through play. And I remember Larry Schweinhart saying, from Perry, saying, we want our programs to look like everyday life. We want the kids to be busy and occupied. Craig Ramey said the same thing, to look like they're very involved and care about it. So that's intentional in development. Then I think skill building strategies are important. And what are those? They're particularly useful when you're dealing with challenging behavior, whether you're a parent or professional, but also in everyday language, which are things like taking the child's view, understanding the child's perspective, sharing reasons for what you're asking kids to do, joint problem solving, not fixing things for children, but involving them in solving problems as they're able to as they grow. And then scaffolding. Studies that we've looked at, for example, say that if you answer kids' questions right away, you're not really prompting their curiosity. They're going to move on to the next bright, shiny object. We need to continue to scaffold. And then the mindset that the adult has, an opportunity mindset, which is that you see challenges as problems to be overcome. You see change as possible, but you also have the self-efficacy to believe that you can change things. So we think that an opportunity mindset is really critical in behavior. And then promoting developmental needs is the next area, helping kids feel they belong. That's going to go such a long way. I mean, we can't be here today without thinking about what happened yesterday. And the whole notion of helping children be the kind of citizens we want, not just the kind of workers that we want, is so crucial, but helping them know that they belong, that they're respected, that they have some autonomy, that they are competent, but that we're challenging them, and that they helping them develop an identity. I think those are all so important. And if you look at some of the measures that have been used to study quality in early childhood, I'm thinking of Pianta, for example, at the University of Virginia. When they look at social emotional support, they find that it really promotes meeting developmental needs. And if you add instructional support, that talks about helping children be competent and learn. We can't separate out social emotional development. And then finally, life skills, and that's really the point of Mind in the Making. But we need to continue to develop life skills. And I saw that long ago, before we had the language for executive function or life skills, when I looked at those programs at Abecedarian and the Chicago Child Parent Centers and the Perry Prue School Project. Think about the Perry Project. It's plan, do, review. The kids make a plan, they do something, and then they go back and evaluate it. They review it. And that's the core of executive function kinds of skills. Perspective taking, helping children understand how other people think and feel. Problem solving, which is reflection and critical thinking. All of those skills, life skills, are so critical. So in the next iteration of an Academy report, I would really hope that they would include executive function skills. And not just that, but pro-social. How do we use those skills? Are we using them for the benefit of others? Again, my message from yesterday is we have to help children be better citizens of the world. We have to help them be able to solve the problems in good, constructive ways, and not just in ways that benefit themselves. Thank you.
Ellen, thank you. And we'll turn to Dr. Myra Jones-Taylor from 0 to 3 here next. Myra, as Pat and Ellen certainly represent kind of the research perspective. I think you and I bring through our work kind of more of the policy perspective to bear on this conversation. But I know, like me, that this is such a fascinating topic. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about is that the report really highlights a very important policy topic as well, which is the need for equity and access to high quality care. Here we've got this all of the science and this wonderful report that speaks to the benefit of the program or of high quality early childhood programs, but we know that not all of the kids who need them are able to readily access them. So from the policy perspective, how do we ensure that children can better maybe enjoy the benefits of these kinds of programs?
Thanks, Dan. What I love about this report, and Pat mentioned it earlier, is that it really takes off the question of whether or not this matters off the table, which the science has been very clear for so long, right? But what it allows us to do is really get to those policy questions that you just addressed. I love something that Ellen, you just mentioned, process variables versus structural variables. That was a big part of my doctoral dissertation. That is so important that we actually think about what goes into these programs, what goes into the early childhood settings that so many of our children are in, and that so many children are shut out of course, is something I want to get to in a second. But we know that infants and toddlers and all young children learn through play and exploration, but the quality of the interactions with adult caregivers and the adults in their lives is so critical. And if you think about early educators and caregivers, we need to make sure that they are prepared and trained to have all of that support so they can really deliver on the promise of this research. And yet we know that as a nation, we are not emphasizing this. We do not have the policies to support what we know, what the science is telling us young children need. Just for example, most states set minimum quality requirements for infant and toddler childcare far too low. We know that 30 states have adopted an infant toddler credential, which recognizes providers' achievement of actually, attaining this information and really being able to understand the brain science and then apply it to their daily practice. But this credential should really be the ground floor for what we know what caregivers and educators should have. And yet so many states don't even have that, and it's really a higher tier. We know that, far too many babies do not even have access to it. So that's the provider, the educator side. But thinking about the number of children who actually have access to it is truly shameful, especially given what this report and so many other reports have told us, that these quality interactions, these quality settings truly matter. We know that 15 states fail to meet basic standards set by Early Head Start, in terms of adult-child ratios. Only 7% of infants and toddlers who are eligible for such a high quality setting like Early Head Start actually have access to it, 7%. If you think about our ability to fully fund and train a workforce and have those settings throughout the country, what we would able to see in young children's development, it would be truly transformational. And of course, the cost of care is hugely prohibitive, right? To get back to your question about access to these programs, we know that the child care subsidy program barely, and Pat mentioned this earlier, barely meets, it doesn't even come close to meeting the complete need, the entire need that we see across the country. And so we know that care is too expensive. We know that access to it quality care is far too limited throughout this country. But even before the pandemic set in, we knew that there was a crisis at our hands. We knew that childcare was truly underfunded. There wasn't enough of it. Childcare deserts proliferate throughout this country. And it's even worse for infants and toddlers. When I was commissioner of early childhood for the state of Connecticut, there was only one licensed infant toddler spot for every 9 babies who needed one. And Connecticut was not alone. And so as we think about what we need to build back better, we have to really take the science and make sure that our policies and our funding for these policies are meeting what the science is telling us. Just a few quick things that we need to be doing. Childcare, we need to be treating it like the essential service that it is. Early educators need to be supported and compensated and trained, and families need access to it. We need to make sure that states and communities have access to these funds. We know that there's we want to have $57 billion to stabilize. We know the research is telling us we need $57 billion to stabilize childcare. And what we just received in this last stimulus is really a drop in the bucket. And so from a policy perspective, from an advocacy perspective, we need people to take reports like this, take the research that, the reports that Hunt has put together, that 0 to 3 has put together, and make sure that we reach out to our policymakers to demand that we actually have the science meet the policies that we know we need for young children and families in this country.
Myra, thank you. Pat, I want to turn back to you. As as we've been talking about this report, it is a really elegant summary of the science maybe that is settled at this point. But I want to shift gears a little bit and talk to you and take advantage of the opportunity that we have in having you on the panel today to talk about maybe some science that isn't quite as settled as what ended up in the Science Behind It report. And so I'd be fascinated to know from you, what are you studying currently, or what are you reading as you look into the future? And what do you see coming down the path that maybe will be informing the early childhood field in the years to come?
Right. Well, it's fun to talk about this because, if you're a brain scientist, you want to dive deeper. I mean, everything we learn makes us want to go deeper and learn more. So right now, up until the pandemic stopped us from testing babies and young children, but we'll be back at it. We're analyzing data right now. We've been looking at the role of the brain because the brain tells us something that behavior can't. Things that show that early in development, when a baby is stimulated, a sight, a sound, a word from a parent, the smell of mother, you can see that action centers in the brain are activated, even though the information coming into the brain is only sensory. The baby saw something, the baby heard something, the baby felt something. But the action centers in the brain that could respond to that movement, like when you're touched to reach out and touch, when you've heard language to talk back, when you've seen something to sort of act, an object to act on that object, they're activated. Now, you would not know that unless you're looking at a baby in a big brain machine. That's what we do. Put babies, little brains in big machines that cost $2.5 million. And we do that because you can see things that you can't see in any other way. So we've done studies and published them to show that when you speak to a baby, that's before the age in which they can talk back, say 6 months, 7 months, the brain centers that will eventually allow them to talk are active, like rehearsing, like how do I get into this conversation? So why is it so valuable for these early conversations to occur? Because you're exercising that serve and return. You're exercising the baby's ability to get into the conversation. So that's one example. A second one is to think about how early experiences that are quite common, in this case, the experience of music. So a postdoc of mine discovered that when babies experience simple music, like the rhythm of the waltz in a play group with their parents, a lot of the infant music classes do this. What happens, and it's compared to a control group that has the same kind of social play but no music, what happens is you improve the auditory system's ability to pick up any mistakes in rhythm, but not only for music, but for speech, for other patterns. And you see in the kids who got this experience, prefrontal cortex, this area in the front of your brain that detects patterns and then learns to expect them. What happens in these kids who have had the music is they're looking for patterns. As soon as the music starts, their prefrontal cortex is like waiting for the next note that they can predict. The brain wants to predict. And we all want to predict what's going to happen next in order to survive. So when you miss a note or you mistime it, these kids in the intervention group, prefrontal cortex is going, wow, okay, it's not there, something happened. And they do that not only for music, but for speech. So your simple things like music, like playing peekaboo that has a rhythm and an outcome, and babies participate, trains the brain for patterns. And once you're trained for patterns, you start looking for them. And when you look for patterns, you predict more and more and more. And so simple experiences, but again, we have to say not everybody gets these. So if your world is chaotic, there are no patterns. You're not playing peekaboo. You're not doing pat a cake. The world is chaotic. You don't know if you're going to be fed, much less taken care of. And so the inability to predict the world at a simple level has repercussions way downstream. And so for me, it's like getting at mechanistic explanations as to why early development is so important. Why does it matter? Because it's building architecture to do things like detect patterns, which is eventually going to turn into executive function. Direct your attention to the pattern. And then finally, we're learning tons of things about how interventions can be formulated. We formulated an intervention to ignite bilingual learning in children. And so we have a method and a curriculum, 32-week curriculum for teachers. It's called Sparkling, to spark languages in kids. And we've tested it in Madrid, Spain, and we're about to test it in the United States for our, 8% of the children in the United States under the age of 8 years. So under the age of 8 years, we have 32% of the children who are dual language learners now, learning a language at home other than English, which they need for school. So we need to attend. What teachers aren't prepared, there are no curriculum for them. Early educators don't know, they aren't trained. And so the Sparkling program is to bring a method for 0 to 5-year-olds, dual language learners, to learn second languages, which has been shown to improve executive function, improve their job prospects, improve health because you avoid Alzheimer's if you exercise this prefrontal cortex a lot. You don't age as quickly, and you don't become a person with Alzheimer's as often. So that's what's on the horizon, that we are to the state of brain science where we can actually apply it. And I am so excited about that.
That's fascinating. Ellen, I want to give you an opportunity to sort of weigh in on the same question. What are you looking at here that you think is going to be trending for us here as we're looking a couple of years down the road? And Ellen, you're on mute.
Make sure my dogs are quiet. We are at Mind in the Making. One of the things we're doing is we will be launching an online curriculum that we've spent the last year developing with the University of Washington. And we're just in the process of receiving it, looking at it for the first time, and then sending it out, making any changes and sending it out for testing, but doing that process that Pat is talking about. But our goal is to share the science in ways that's free, that's accessible to everyone. So what we've only been able to do in person, now we're putting online. The other thing that we're doing that I think is important is taking this framework that I just described and finding ways to measure it. And I think we're down the road we're able to measure intentional adults, parents and teachers. We're able to measure a developmental framework. We're able to measure behaviorally more skill building strategies. We have been developed a measure of an opportunity mindset that turns out to be pretty predictive for adolescents. Where we're really missing, I think, and what's important for us is to work with other scientists to develop measures of meeting developmental needs. If we know that a match or mismatch between a developmental need is so important, we should be finding ways in early childhood programs, for example, to measure whether that's happening or not. We've talked a long time about not just measuring kids, but measuring the environment. And I think this will take us down that road. And also, we know from a lot of behavioral research that executive functions or executive function skills are so important, but we don't have ways to measure the life skills that go along with them. That is, we can measure the core components of inhibitory control or working memory or cognitive flexibility with lots of games and measures on up through the developmental cycle. But how do we turn that into measures of the things that we know get to be important? Pat mentioned thinking creatively. How do we measure that? How do we measure focus and self-control? How do we measure perspective taking? Those sorts of things. So I think our next steps as a team, in conjunction with lots of other scientists, are finding ways both behaviorally and in self-report measures to be able to assess the things that we think are go into that black box and can improve development so that we make it more equitable, basically.
Thanks, Helen. Myra, I want to give you a chance while we're all prognosticating about what we're looking toward the future. Obviously, the great work that you do at 0 to 3, is a process of translating this science into policy. Is there anything that you see kind of on the horizon that you think will be impacting early childhood policy in the years to come?
Yes, thanks, Dan. I think 20 years ago when I got started in this field, which feels, I can't believe I can say that. And then I think about Pat and Ellen, and you guys have been doing this, leading this charge for much longer. And we're so grateful for all you're doing and have done. People used to talk about early childhood education as a magic bullet. Regardless of your family's economic setting, if you just had these access to this high quality care and education, you would be okay. And we know that research has shown it makes a huge difference, but we also know it makes it so much harder even if you're in a high quality setting, if you are hungry. If your family is in a state of chaos, the chaos that Pat just talked about. And so as we think about where we are now as a field, we really are recognizing that you can't just talk about education and the education of young children independent of the family context and independent of the economic and socioeconomic circumstances in which families are raising their young children. We cannot separate the daily racialized traumas that families experience because of systemic racism in this country. And so I think we are really at a different place. It's harder, it's messier from a policy perspective, but it's going to get us to a much better place for young children. And so when I think about this in terms of policy, I think about this obviously in the context of COVID. We know this has made this very clear what it means to have the inability to predict patterns, right? To Pat's point, we have completely lost that as adults. Think about the impact that has on adults who are raising young children. It makes it incredibly hard for children to predict any pattern when they are living in a family where a family is experiencing severe emotional trauma because of the lack of economic support that they have, because they are worried that if they go to work, they're going to get sick and bring COVID home to their families, right? So when I think about, thinking about where we might be a few years from now, hopefully sooner than that, I think, we're tracking the importance of raising the minimum wage, increase the earned income tax credit, ensuring that all families have access to paid sick days and paid leave. We know these are critical to early education. They do not happen independent of each other, right? So as we think about this, making sure that families have adequate income so that they can meet the needs of their children and be able to play patty cake, to Pat's point, because they're not working 3 jobs and those jobs all have unpredictable schedules, something else we've been tracking quite a bit. Making sure that families have stable nutrition, stable housing, and adequate nutrition. We have seen a huge increase in food insecurity. That is not good for all of the early learning we've been talking about, right? We know, according to the Rapid EC project, which I'm on the National Advisory board for, that's out of the University of Oregon, led by Phil Fisher, that more than half of young children within families facing financial hardship are facing emotional distress. We are in a crisis moment on all different levels, right? And this is having a huge impact on early learning. So for those leaders in states right now who are thinking about early learning, you cannot separate the importance of family economic security if you really want to deliver on all of the science that Pat and Ellen have been talking about. So raising the minimum wage is important, increasing the earned income tax credit, increasing the child tax credit. Far too states do that. Making sure families have access to paid leave and paid sick days are absolutely critical if we are going to turn this boat around for young children and families.
Myra, thank you. Pat, I want to give you an opportunity to sort of weigh in. Myra has raised, the specter of COVID, which, continues to just rage on in this country. It is disrupting routines. It is disrupting our economic lives. From a scientific perspective, what do you see as the impact of this time? Children are opting out of kindergarten and opting out of group-based preschool programs. How do you see this impacting these kids going forward?
Yeah, I think first of all, the scientific principle that's underlined by this, by the adversity that COVID has presented to all of us, but unequally, as Myra so beautifully described there. It's not been a level playing field with regard to how much people are suffering. But if you think about the general thing, that COVID has produced. It's an understanding of the needs of the social brain. Science has demonstrated for the babies and for adults, for children of all ages, how important social interaction is to our daily lives. It's essential for cognition. It's the gateway in early development for cognition. But it is important for our mental health to keep our skills in all domains sharp. We need to be jostling with other people socially, meaning you need that stimulation of people agreeing and disagreeing and coming together, and the unpredictability of social beings. And what we're all experiencing is this kind of robbing of the social brain of the stimulation that it needs. And it's affecting us all, though some really disastrously. Kids who are growing up in severe adversity, this has made everything worse. And for parents who are able to work at home and they're with their little ones, they're reporting huge numbers of these feelings of depression. The medication for depression, all the docs are telling us, medication for depression is way up. This sense of loneliness, this sense of abandonment. And so the children whose parents are home, the little ones, might have at first been delighted that their parents are home. But now the impact of this continued aloneness on the parents' lives has affected young children. The school-age kids, the teens, are reporting huge frustration. They are not learning online. Most of them, some are, but most of them aren't. They're losing whole years of school. And so it is really, really going to be challenging to come back from this. I think the positive spin on it is that we've learned something about the need for social interaction. We've learned something about the value of human participation. And the kids themselves, when you talk to teens and you talk to school-age kids, want so much to get back to learning with their friends. And it's not a surprise. The brain science, I could tell you many new experiments demonstrating that when you learn together, even as a 9-month-old baby, if you put two babies together, they're going to learn more than if either of those babies was learning alone. And so this sense of the social brain feeding learning and feeding us all our lives to sort of stay awake and open and really giving it our best and growing depends upon, to some degree, this social milieu that we grew up in, that we depend on and that we need to survive.
Pat, thank you. Ellen, want to ask you about research itself as we're going through this unusual time. Are there ways that you see research in education changing right now?
Yes, and one of the things that I think we all want to do is to get beyond it's bad or it's good to what makes it work, because it's here. And so looking at under what conditions are beyond demographics, for kids who have adversity, what's making it work, for kids who don't, what's making it work, et cetera. And interestingly enough, we're doing a nationally representative study at the foundation of children, older children than we're talking about today, 9 through 18. But we've seen some interesting patterns that are borne out in some other people's research. We've seen, for example, for older kids, stress has dropped slightly, and depression has dropped slightly. And this is our research, but it also is Jean Twinge's research of nationally representative samples. In our research, it's still high, it's still way too high. But we've seen that 68% of young youth have no indicators of depression, 17 have 1 indicator, and 15 have 2 indicators. So it's still high, it's way too high, but it was a little better than most people expected on average, and we have to go beyond averages. So why is that? And the Twinge study has suggested that kids are sleeping more, and they're actually, in some cases, having some time with their parents. That's good. What we've looked at particularly is school engagement, and Pat says it's beautifully. School engagement has dropped precipitously during COVID for these kids. It's gone 14% were not engaged at all pre-COVID. It's now up to 36%. Very engaged, 19% were very engaged, and now 8% are very engaged. So we wanted to look at, okay, which kids are very engaged? And we found a couple of things. This is parallels Pat's notion of the social brain, and the need for autonomy as well, if we think about needs. The kids who are likely to be more engaged have choices. They have autonomy. They have choices in assignments and choices in projects. And that doesn't cost anything, it doesn't cost anybody anything to do, giving kids some choice around some assignments. That said, 70% of kids in our study reported no choices. So we've got a long way to go. They engage in social brain activities. They have small group discussions either with other kids or with teachers. Again, that doesn't cost anybody anything to do. 51% have none of that. 25% have either discussions with teachers or with other kids, and only 24% have both. Again, it costs nothing. Then belonging. We've seen that the kids who feel that the teachers know them and that they belong are way more likely to be engaged in learning. So if this is going to go on for a while, and it is, there are things that we can do. And you know, we have about half of the kids who feel that they belong and about half of the kids who maybe sort of don't, and about a quarter of the kids who sort of maybe don't, and another quarter of the kids who don't feel that they belong. So we have room to make changes that, again, don't cost us any money. I don't like the notion of learning loss and learning recovery, because I think that if we don't take the lessons from the pandemic, first of all, people are learning all the time. They may not be learning what we want them to, but they're learning. But if we don't think of this as an opportunity for learning renewal, for looking at what is best in how people learn and translating that, then we've wasted this crisis. We need to learn from this crisis and really all get together to think about how are we going to renew the engagement and learning for all children.
Great, Ellen, thank you. I think we're starting to run a little bit short on time here, but I want to jump into a couple of questions from the audience. And one Jen asks a question that I think is really interesting from this scientific perspective. You know, for years and years, the early childhood field has looked with great disdain and discouragement at the idea of young children using screens to learn, right? So we've had, you know, all of this discussion about, you know, limited screen time and, you know, sort of discounting the idea even that preschool programs could be meaningfully delivered through technology. And yet, you know, by happenstance this year, that's how a lot of children are able to access preschool and kindergarten this year. So do you all see, and I'll throw it open to the group, maybe everybody can contribute a little bit, but you know, is this year liable to change the way we think about technology in young children? And you know, do you see new best practices emerging from our COVID year?
Well, go ahead, Ellen.
I was going to say, I'll jump in. First of all, I think that screen time has become something that is so harmful to parents in the sense that they just think it's so, some parents, better educated parents, particularly as common sense media, so think it's so evil that they just are on their children if they have any interest in it. And I think we need to look again shine light into that black box and look at under what conditions is it bad and under what conditions is it good. The research shows that under some conditions it's good if you're doing it together, if you're engaged with kids, if the content is good, so forth and so on. So we need to do that. Then I think there's some programs that have done screen time fairly well and not for a whole lot of time. I'm thinking of Tools of the Mind as one program where they have short exercises of fun things, not homework, do your homework, shut up, do your homework kind of stuff, but really fun dramatic play activities that integrate learning for kids, where parents and kids can do them together. And again, not taking too much time because parents don't have a lot of time, but taking the time that they have in the way that we do with Room at the Bezos Family Foundation for more engaged learning. So my hope is, again, with this learning renewal theme, that we'll use the best of, it is here to stay. I have a 7-year-old in my life. Trust me, it's here. Using the best of it in ways that are constructive, and helping parents recognize the difference between what's constructive and not as just a complete all bad.
Right. No, I agree with that, Ellen. We can't think of technology as all bad, because it's not. The more interactive technology becomes, the better it's going to mimic what social interaction provides for you. And the clearest evidence, remember that the clearest evidence was for infants under 17 months. In those studies that were done some time ago, 6 years ago, and not by my group, the more for each additional hour that a baby under 17 months was put in front of a passive television viewing situation, meaning nothing interactive, just watching a television set from a high chair, they had 5 fewer words. Each hour more of television per week resulted in, or was correlated with, 5 fewer words per week, because it was taking the place, placing a child in front of the television set in a passive way, for a passive experience, was taking the place of human interaction. But now I think we're creating technologies that allow more back and forth, children watching other children, and especially after 17 months, seeing a person on a screen, children have enough symbolic reasoning to understand that represents a person. So when grandma Skypes with a child who's 18 months, the parents will tell you, and I believe that child recognizes that's grandma, and you're doing grandma stuff, even though it's on Skype or on Zoom or on one of these technology platforms. So as Ellen said, use it as an opportunity to learn about new ways to educate, and the group context in which kids can learn with technology when they're interacting. Lots of studies say that co-viewing and this partnership, the social partnership, enhances that kind of learning, even in very young children. So that's hopeful, I think.
Dan, I would just add, I know we're talking about education, but I think it's fascinating to think about technology in the context of telehealth, and what we've seen with our infant toddler court program, our families who are, we're trying to support them to either have their child returned to them, or stay engaged in their child's life. And so that technology, that phone, that screen is a lifeline. And that has been the one thing that has really, it's been interesting to track. So I think we have to think about this in the global sense of how these screens have been used, and it's going to be fascinating, the research that will come out of this.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. As we are winding down the hour, there's, as we've been talking about this National Academies report, we've had a special friend join us here. A new face pop up here just at the end. Willa Kammerer, many of you may know, is the director of the terrific new documentary Starting at Zero, Reimagining American Education, that was put out very recently by the Saul Zaentz Charitable Foundation. Willa has been in the process since the release of Starting at Zero, of pulling together, with the assistance of Zaentz and the Bezos Family Foundation, a new short film that features Dr. Cool on this topic. So we wanted to end the hour today with an opportunity to give you just a little teaser of what is to come. And I can tell you, as soon as the film is ready, those of you who signed up and are registered today are going to be among the very first to have the link to this new short film. And so, Willa, wanted to welcome you into the conversation for just a moment and let you share a little bit about this new project.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you to the panelists and for hosting this really, inspiring and impactful conversation to kick off the new year. As Dan said, we look forward to sharing a link to the video with all webinar attendees as soon as it's ready. We're working on it hard. So as you may know, the Hunt Institute partnered with the Saul Zaentz Charitable Foundation and the Ounce of Prevention, Now Start Early, on the premiere of the film, Starting at Zero, Reimagining Education in America, which I directed. And as it turns out, so many of the key takeaways from the recent National Academy of Sciences report are the very same themes and takeaways which we emphasize in the film. So when Ellen shared an interview with our team that she had conducted with Dr. Cool about the National Academy of Sciences report, we knew we had to find a way to partner to share some of these key takeaways, which really are, joint takeaways, eloquently explained by Dr. Kuhl in her interview with Ellen and the Bezos Family Foundation and illustrated by the concepts in our film. So the final result is a 16-minute video produced by the Saul Zaentz Charitable Foundation in partnership with Bezos Family Foundation, the Hunt Institute, the Alabama Department of Early Childhood Education, as well as Start Early. And we're in the final stages of production, and we look forward to sharing it with you as soon as it's live later this month. So keep your eye on your inboxes. And if you want to learn more about the film, you can visit startingatzerofilm.com. And there's a place you can sign up for email updates. But we look forward to sharing the video with you soon. And in the meantime, stay safe and well. And thanks so much for this great webinar today.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for starting at zero. I think I would just reiterate to the group that is watching today, if you have not had the opportunity to see this documentary, it's really remarkably well done and something that you don't want to miss. So please do visit the website. Well, and tell them the website one more time for the film.
Sure. It's startingatzerofilm.com.
startingatzerofilm.com. Go check it out if you have not. It really is something that any of you who have enough interest in this topic to be here with us today absolutely have to go and check out. So with that, our hour is winding down. I want to take a moment to really just express our thanks. Dr. Patricia Kuhl of the University of Washington's Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences, Ellen Galinsky, Chief Science Officer of the Bezos Family Foundation, and Myra Jones-Taylor, who is the Chief Policy Officer at 0 to 3. It is so great to have all of you with us today. And as one last coming attractions, see if I can get these slides to pop up, all these various different Zoom configurations here. Give me a moment to get to this slide. But do want to share with you an exciting announcement. We have a brand new webinar that we are announcing to you for the very first time right this moment. It is coming soon. It is next Tuesday, January 12th, and will be of particular interest to those of you who may be joining us from the state of Virginia. We will be providing a pre-legislative session briefing from Governor Ralph Northam and company, who will be sharing the governor's early childhood priorities for 2021 as the Virginia General Assembly heads back into session. So we'll have a conversation with Governor Northam, with First Lady Pamela Northam, with Senator Louise Lucas, who is the President Pro Tem of the Virginia Senate, and Jenna Conway, who is the Chief School Readiness Officer for the Commonwealth of Virginia. The link to register for this on Tuesday will be available on the Hunt Institute's social media accounts here within the next couple of minutes. So as we wrap up today, if you are interested in joining us, you certainly don't need to be from Virginia to find this of interest. If you are have an interest in hearing how a fellow state is approaching early childhood leadership, you couldn't go wrong listening in to Governor Northam. So that'll be on Tuesday. Our next early efforts webinar will be coming at the beginning of February. We'll be joined by several stakeholders from the state of Massachusetts. The Harvard Early Learning Study is going on currently, has been tracking the progress of a cohort of preschoolers in the state of Massachusetts, and has been a little bit interrupted, as you might imagine, by COVID, but as one of the fortuitous pieces of this all, Harvard has put together findings on the impact of COVID on the families who have been participating in this study. So we look forward to joining Dr. Noni Lasso of the Saul Zaentz Early Education Initiative at the Harvard Graduate School, Nikki Burnett, who is the Executive Director of Educare Springfield, and Commissioner Samantha Agner-Traworgy, who is the Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care. We will be joined that day by Dr. Shana Cook of the Bainham Family Foundation, who will serve as the moderator for that conversation. And then later in February, just want to alert you that our Early Childhood Philanthropy series continues. We'll be talking later in February with Ellen Roche, who is the Executive Director of Trust for Learning, Mika Sales of the Duke Endowment, and Monica Hobbs-Villion, who is joining us from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So great early childhood programming still to come. We got a great year, and couldn't have asked for a better set of panelists to kick off the year and this great conversation today. I want to thank again one more time all of our panelists for being with us, Willa as well for coming and talking a little bit about the upcoming short film. We'll be following up with you with the link to that film as soon as it is available. And with that, I want to wish everybody again a happy new year, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Dan. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much.